Hi, folks. I'm really sorry about that. I was trying to do a stream tonight, and then I have this weird thing with the second screen, and so when I plug my computer in, I have all these bazillion photos on my desktop, and it like fries the thing, and so I did it wrong, and I tried to stop it and then restart it, and it wasn't restarting properly, so anyway, I really apologize, but I guess I'm going to go ahead and still try to do this tonight. I did chapter 1 last night of Oliver Reiser's World Sensorium, and I just thought I might take a minute before we get started because I do have a video that I want to show. And so let me move to the picture within picture, and hopefully this will show the screen. This is a clip that I pulled earlier tonight. It's up on my channel, and it's of a woman. Her name is Allison, I think Duetman is maybe how she pronounces it. It's part of about an hour and a half talk that was put out by Protocol Labs, and essentially she's the CEO of this Foresight Institute that is a project of Eric Drexler. He was a key early nanotechnologist and evidently has now moved over to Oxford and is working on molecular computing. And so her background is to sort of look at a lot of emerging tech and put it together. So she was doing this presentation for Protocol Labs. And so some of the stuff when I'm talking about the world brain and this idea of using people as computational interfaces, which is going to be part of the series that I'm going to be posting later. Essentially, these 3 clips, it's about 2 minutes, about these different projects, I think help explain what this is going to look like. And so I want to put it out here so people can kind of process it. And again, I don't know exactly how it's all going to look, but it gives you the sense of using non-traditional user interfaces for computing. And then it talks about gamifying molecular engineering as a massive multiplayer role-playing game. And then it talks about using smart contracts as ways of structuring community, sort of these socio-technical systems. And then it goes on to talk about essentially the network state, which is something Sebs has talked about in the past. Anyway, this idea of networked states, that you create societies that exist digitally, and that those societies could be sort of computational mechanisms. So I'm going to see if this will start, and we'll...
Something that has really blown me away. So this is a presentation given at a workshop that we had this year, and it's really quite something. So basically it's here they're proposing to simulate small proteins by using a physical building as a computer. And so you basically see people here using tables as computing surfaces, physical objects such as notepads and so forth that are captured by overhead cameras as the interface, and literally creating these molecules, moving them about with laser pointers and kind of playing around with each other's molecules, but physically.
Okay, so I just want to pause for a second and say, so what she's saying is that they have light, they have overhead cameras that are watching, and that they can play with physical materials as if they were part of a computational process. And so one of the things I want to raise is this issue of preschool and what happened with the Wildflower Montessori franchise that was backed by Semp Kanvar of Cello. And that essentially, at the time, he was in social computing at MIT Media Lab, and that he was making this Montessori preschool, and they were putting, as I've mentioned multiple times, sensors in the children's slippers, and then also sensors in the room, so that they could track how the children were interacting with different objects in the room. And so I think in some ways, this is like an early pilot project of using a physical space and people as embodied agents in that space with sensor networks. And actually in those schools, they had artificial vision cameras on the ceiling watching the children and translating their activities in the classroom into leaderboards. And so this is this interface between human and machine. But the idea is that I'm assuming at some point it will become seamless. It will be like us having electricity in our homes and we don't really think about it, right? And so this is just a really new way of thinking about computation, and I think it's really important to imagine what that means when people are essentially acting on behalf of computational systems. So later they're going to talk a little bit about massive multi-online role-playing games in computation systems. But as we finish out looking at this building that is being used, and it's actually in Oakland, I looked it up. It's Dynamic Land, Brett Victor of Dynamic Land, and it's in Oakland. And Oakland is a hotbed for so many of these impact finance, tech, social impact accelerators, and this is also being in Oakland. And I think they're going to use it with children. So keep that in mind, the Wildflower Montessori.
And so this is this kind of like idea that if we do physicality, you have this kind of like shared mental map of what other people are working on. Brett Victor at Dynamic Land may be a name for some of you, is doing absolutely mind-boggling work and has here partnered up with Sean Douglas. And you can look at this basically. You can go to the lab and try it out. It's pretty fantastical. And then here we come back to the more long-term goals of molecular nanotechnology. There was also at one of our workshops this year, and that's Eric Drexler, who founded Foresight. He's now at FHI, and so he's basically thinking like, can we use massive multiplayer online gaming for complex molecular systems design? So could we create, like using a game engine like Godot, basically a system that is interestingly enough for a bunch of people to pile in on an online game using real data, and helping people to create these more complex machines in a way that is fun. And so he's trying to outsource much of the work that people are currently doing in the lab. And it's a project that is now under development. And so I really encourage you guys to stay up.
All right. So I just want to pause this for a second and just reiterate that. So what she's talking about, Eric Drexler, he was the one who founded the Foresight Lab. So she is now the CEO of this organization. He's in Oxford. It's important to know that both of them are affiliated with a concept called effective altruism. And some people may have heard of it in relationship to the FTX scandal and Sam Bankman-Fried, and they were part of this effective altruism milieu. Almost seems a bit like a cult, but it's sort of based in Oxford, and it's this philosophy of a scientific charity, and this idea of it's going to be meshed with the public goods finance aspect and big data analytics. So it's important to see that she is doing, like she and Eric Drexler are both the nanotech space and the effective altruism, and it's all welded into the larger crypto aspect. Now, if you looked at the FTX scandal, and what they were talking about is like, oh, he wanted to make more money so that he could give it away because he was just a misguided young guy who, broke the rules so he could make money and be philanthropic, and wasn't that a problem, right? It's sort of in a poo-poo dismissible aspect, and they're not actually making the connection between this way of thinking about scientific charity that comes directly out of Bentham, and then adding that into that the optimization protocols that are going to be linked to like algorithms, like public benefit algorithms, but tied to financial markets and tied to network sensor systems. And then potentially, who knows what they're going to do with nanotechnology later. But it's nothing to be dismissed. It's actually very, very significant, because the way in which charity is going to be proposed is to manage people through cyber-physical systems in the name of a charitable enterprise, in the name of public good, in the name of cooperation. Only none of us agreed to it, and we didn't actually understand what it was. So let me keep going with that.
Up to speed on what they're working on. The next one up, we have human-to-human cooperation. And so this is something where many of you will feel at home. I will show a few familiar faces here. The goal here really of this group is to increase, first of all, human-to-human cooperation. So what could it mean to really unlock our potential? This one is a name that I'm hoping most of you recognize by now. And so Juan Benet really joined us to discuss this notion of Pareto topian mechanism design. So what would it look like if we could increase the human ability to engage in Pareto preferred interactions over time? And the way...
Okay, so I'm just going to pause here again. I had to look up what Pareto-topianism was, and that's how I found out about their ties to the effective altruism. But it's all mathematical, and it's like a cone of potentiality. And they have the whole Alice and Bob, and Alice wants this, and Bob wants that, and sort of how they negotiate. But this idea is that there's some mathematical idealized place in the system that is the sweet spot of every good thing, right? And so they're going to engineer society to accomplish this task, to get people, to get people in, like, using the digital public goods, using the smart contracts, using the physical world as a game to try to affect, like, this Benthamic philosophic calculus. But in that, you can see how the mechanisms that they're going to use in the game are the things I've talked about, right? Like contract law, and these are going to be smart contracts. And she'll get into that later, but this is one Beneit protocol. So smart contracts, and then the economics of it, right? So this is going to be tokenomics. This is going to be engineered token economies, and the way in which derivative products are in there. So that is the betting, and that's something that I really want to bring out in the series that I'm going to be pushing out, is this idea that in the future, everything is going to become a betting market, because this idea in the Web3 space, in the finance derivative space, is that the market is the supreme arbiter of truth, right? And so everything becomes a commodity, everything becomes a bet. And everyone is betting on the game that is being played in the real world. And the people who are playing the game may not even understand that the game that they're in, as they're facilitating the gaming and the computation process. It's like layers upon layers upon layers. So let me just go back to this. Okay.
Way we can do that is using software already to reshape really much of the mechanisms that human civilizations run on. And some of them include law, like contracts, rules, rights, and courts. And so you all are deeply, intimately familiar with blockchain, smart contracts. So that's that bit. And then economics, such as money, property, stocks, derivatives. And I think, this, I don't have to spend much time on. You can grok that one good, I think. But I think the kind of amount of potential, as one shows here, right, that can be unlocked really through, like, just coming up with better mechanisms for human cooperation is absolutely is kind of stupefying. Next one, in a similar vein here, is we have Balaji join us to discuss really the concept of the network state. And so the idea here really is that, we already know how to start our own company, we know how to start our own community, we know how to start our own currency, but now soon enough we'll also be able to start really our own sovereignties. And he,
Okay, so did you hear that? Start our own sovereignties. Now, where have you heard sovereignty around, in the last 2 or 3 years, right? And I've been raising my hand throughout much of this going, it's not what you think. Self-sovereignty is not what you think. Self-sovereignty means that you get to be a blockchain commodity. But how much of this sovereign movement, sovereignty movement, liberty movement, they've been conditioning people with these words for 2 years to accept that sovereignty, of course, is the desirable condition, is that we be self-sovereign as a digital commodity. And then that's going to be flipped. And so, essentially these people who are thinking they're about freedom are really getting under the dome.
Came out with this concept a little while ago and shaped much of the discourse really up to now, to the extent that people are already moving into, or at least like using many of the ideas to now prototype what previously were called C-states or were called charter cities. Now you can build.
Okay, and so I just want to mention about the seasteading, that was a project of Milton Friedman's grandson. I believe his name is Patry Friedman. And early on in, when all of this was going down, like with the Greater Reset, John Bush, is an associate of Patry Friedman. Has interviewed him, thinks the seasteading thing is great. And again, Peter Thiel was backing the seasteading idea. So that once we get to the understanding of complex adaptive systems, they want unique set-aside states of exception to have these, as Jamie Wheel would call them, ethical cults, right? Intentional communities that are disparate, and they might be physical, or they might just be simply digital. They may, but that what they are building is a computational architecture out of life with human machine hybrid consciousnesses that are coming. And this is going to all be sold to us as a positive thing.
Build them kind of like on the network and move them to potentially physical locations.
All right, so there we go. Let me just take a minute. Let me go back to the picture-in-picture. Okay, so thank you. I was just looking at the comments about Mark Miller. I need to look more into that. Actually, I think Steffers just sent me a paper, and it had Alison Duetman and Drexler, and I believe Mark Miller. So that's not someone I'm familiar with. But this is my map over here that I had done. Gosh, it's been a while. This is my Pegasus Park map. And this started out with Dallas. This was this is like how huge this map is. I started out working on this with Lynn around the Texas Pegasus Park and the way in which the biotech and the ed tech were converging and sort of what it meant for the larger area, and Texas Instruments being sort of central, and Richardson actually, which is where Drexler's thing is. So let me just see if I can get situated. So I'm not sorry, guys. Okay, so this is the Pegasus Park here in the middle. This is the biotech space. The water cooler, you can see all of the ed tech stuff around it. And then, I mentioned Texas Instruments, and Drexler is up in this part of the map. So he was the founder of the Foresight Institute, but I didn't have Miller in there. At the time, he was married to Christine Peterson. That was his first wife. He later got divorced and married Rosa Wang, who had ties to the New York Federal Reserve, former investment banker in Hong Kong, and a social entrepreneur. And it's interesting now that I'm looking at this, the global director of digital financial services at Oxford. That makes sense why he's at Oxford. And so his theories influenced limits to growth. He had the theory of the gray goo, the self-replicating nanomachines. And he was on the steering committee of something in 2007 called a Productive Nanosystems Technology Roadmap. And so these were all these different people. The report was prepared by UT Battelle, which I'm assuming is in Tennessee. That's Oak Ridge, right? So there we go. We're on the way towards the Moonshot Project and living as an avatar. This guy, Alex Kozak, he was the project lead, and he was the former VP of nanotech at Battelle. So these were all sorts of folks who were involved. There we've got Charles Lieber up there. He was on the steering committee as well. So just to sort of situate this in, we've got the U.S. Department of Energy. And, I was talking with someone recently, we were sort of messaging back and forth about really the focus on DARPA and the U.S. military and this idea of the past couple of years and this rollout of these health interventions as being primarily a military program. And while it is, I would say, if you're talking primarily about the Defense Department, but you're not also equally talking about the U.S. Department of Energy, you're missing something, because the U.S. Department of Energy is key in the nanotechnology space and in where we are headed in this human plus technology. A lot of it is centered on nano and nuclear. So the Department of Energy is really important. And I'm just going to pop over to here. Let me see, do we have, oh no, this is, one sec. I need the other map. The game theory map. So this is the effective altruism area. This is part of my research that I've been working on lately. For this series, I haven't put this section out yet, but it's essentially linking this, it's sort of riffing off of an article that Raul had written about poker, and then I was adding stuff about game theory. And then through this sort of windy course, both through iovation fraud detection software that led into sort of Intel, that led into the secret network and Enigma protocol, and that Alameda Research Lab and was an investor in that. And then also this guy, Friedberg, I think it is. Yeah, Dan Friedberg. He was a lawyer who was connected with this poker scandal at Ultimate Bet and then became a chief compliance officer over at FTX. And at the time, like Jason shared with me an article in the New Yorker, actually, it was like a long form essay that was really good about this idea of effective altruism and William McCaskill. And so again, I would say for the most part, like it got a lot of coverage, but I think people maybe were somewhat dismissive because they weren't actually talking about it within the context of Web3, cyber physical systems, nanotechnology, and emergent AI. And what I thought was kind of interesting, Alison Duetman, so I think Steffers just sent me an article that was about essentially looking like their concerns over generalized artificial intelligence and, sort of what you would do next. Oh, do I have a second? Yeah. Like what happens, when AI wakes up and becomes sentient in whatever way that looks like. I mean, that's, I think Nick Bostrom, that's what they're worried about. And I thought it was quite interesting because what they were focused on was the idea of the utility function. Like, because all of these things proceed towards their utility function, towards their programming interest. And so what they were saying is they were trying to figure out like how to structure the AGI lead up in here. This is from a paper with Drexler and Duetman, and I think Miller. Bostrom's main concern regards the prospect of a hard, in other words, sudden takeoff, in which one particular AGI instance reaches AGI first, performs a strategic takeover, and pursues its utility function. According to Bostrom, the most important strategy that humanity can use to make AI safe in that scenario, apart from setting up the initial conditions correctly, is to shape the AI's utility function so that it serves human interests. And so I think that this whole thing is kind of interesting it's just below the surface, right? If you're paying attention to Protocol Labs, like you're getting the story that's below the one on the surface that's about crooked, fraudulent people, and you're understanding more that it's about complex emergent systems in AI, and how this interfaces with the idea of public goods or potentially even extermination of natural life on Earth if we let the AI get control of things. So anyway, and I might show this one other video that I added. Where is it? So this is the molecular printing. Take the next. Let me just pull this up for a sec. Okay, so this is about the molecular printing, and I think I mentioned it before, but in reading Stealing Fire, there's quite an emphasis on altered states of consciousness and I think that part of the computation is they want us to enter into collective minds, which means ego death and entering into this altered state of consciousness. And there are numbers of ways to do this, but pharmaceuticals or psychedelics are part of that. And so in the book, they're actually talking about molecular printers of the type that's featured in this clip, that they would be in your home, like your sous vide, the little robot food thing. Like you would just have your robot precision printing, molecular printing pharmaceutical, and that there would be uploads of your custom drugs, including psychedelics. So I just want to run this.
School of molecular machines. Here we're getting really into the terrain that Foresight was founded on. So we were founded by Eric Drexler and Christine Peterson on the book Engines of Creation. And so that envisions this long-term future of what would it mean if we can actually create things from the bottom up with atomic precision. So really by moving potentially, eventually, individual atoms around. So that's a very long-term goal, but it would mean that you can create almost anything incredibly precisely, cheap, without waste, and you can create entirely new physical objects. And so we're not there yet by far, but we have made an insane amount of progress over the past few years. And so I just want to, briefly give you a quick walkthrough of what's already possible here. And so this will be brief but short and sweet, because I think most of the progress really that I was blown away by this year came from that group. And so here we have that's coming out of David Baker's lab at University of Washington. Here it's Alexis Courbet, and he basically asked, what can we hallucinate de novo proteins already? So this is the dream tools that many of us have played around with for machine learning. And what you can potentially do is using similar tools to really help with protein folding on the path to creating atomically precise machines. Using proteins as individual components. They've published a few incredible papers on this work. It's really pure magic what's coming out of their lab recently, and that is really using kind of state-of-the-art Rosetta tools and others that come from the machine learning community now. This one is a little bit more out there because it involves a physical component too. So that's Lee Cronin at the University of Glasgow, and he is basically building a computer. And so it's basically software that can translate the words that a chemist speaks into recipes for molecules that a robot computer can then understand and produce. So this is this nano-discovery robot. It's a physical device, and it's really linked to kind of like end-to-end to this tool by which, chemists can like try to communicate with it already a little bit like you'd speak to, to an assistant, basically. And so it's really cool work. It's like still advancing, but maybe one level up. And this is Adam Marblestone, who's, I think, speaking on Friday, if I'm not correct, or on Thursday to you guys. So get excited. He definitely has his hands in many different individual fields. But here he's kind of taking up this more longer term goal of a molecular 3D printer. And so he's asking, what could it look like if we did 3D printing with Lego-like macromolecular building blocks and use self-assembly and motors that are based on DNA or protein origami. And so DNA origami is this new field that was spearheaded by Will Shih and a few others at Harvard and other organizations. And he's basically trying to see what would it look like if we take many of the individual components and pieces and put them together that people are already working on. And so this is his concept of molecular additive manufacturing. And so he's really proposing to create a molecular 3D printer that can print individual bits with greater and greater precision. So here we're getting much closer to the early goals of molecular nanotechnology, and it's really great work.
All right. Okay, so let me see. All right, so that's that. Now, I will say that, they've been talking about stuff like this for quite some time. And so, unless you're someone who's in a lab, it's hard to assess how much what they're saying is just fluff and how much of it is true. So I will just sort of give caution, like there's a lot being put out about nanotechnology and molecular engineering, but for the average person, it's just hard to know. So, I would say err on the side of caution. And actually, I was just messaging with somebody today. They were talking about like conservation and water in natural environments, and there was somebody who like knew such things, and I said, well, ask them about nanotechnology. Like, what happens when there's nanotechnology in the water cycle? Like, what is that? Like, are people who are being trained in environmental conservation, like authentic, hopefully conservation, water is vital. And if you actually try to Google nanotechnology in water, all you'll come up with is like how wonderful it is. And it's used to clean water and it's fabulous and everything. Like, I had to look really hard to find an article that said like that there was some question about nanotechnology in the water. So it seems like most of our water is going to have nanotechnology in it sooner or later. And no one's, I mean, the fact that we're not even questioning what that means, or there's not even long-term studies about what the impacts are of having nanotech in the soil and the water, is very concerning. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So this is, we're on chapter 2, the mental fetus. So this is Oliver Reiser, World Sensorium, 1946. This is about the world brain. This is the third installment. Okay, so chapter 2, the mental fetus. Planning subjective and objective. Today, man's conception of man is undergoing a major change. Out of the new concept of man will emerge the archetypal idea that will shape our new culture. In the world that is now in process, man is learning to think of himself not in egotistic terms as an absolute entity, but as part of a single planetary being. And so I would say, again, that is part of this ego death, right? Like, and it's hard because in some ways, like, it is very appealing to imagine that everything is connected, everything is unified. I mean, I don't dispute that that is accurate in some way. And yet I think that our individual identities as living beings who are embodied is important. And the idea of collective self-sacrifice into this giant superorganism isn't something that any of us have really talked about. Like, it's being presumed. And you know, I think the last couple of years, it's been like the narrative has been structured so that if you're not going along with the common good, what is being told to you as the common good, that you're outrageous, right? That you're terribly outrageous, even if you have very principled reasons for having a difference of opinion. But because the narratives have been structured around the common good, because Web3 is being positioned around the common good, because the climate narrative is being positioned around the public good, because social entrepreneurship is being positioned as caring for poor and vulnerable populations, if you question that, you become an egocentric jerk. And it's quite interesting to me to see how far back this goes, right? That the plan has always been, and again, it's hard because for the most part, like, many people on the conservatives are framing this as the Marxist, but they're not understanding that there is a polarization in place between planned economies, socialism, communism, and free market capitalism. That dynamic is supposed to be pivoting, but neither of them is going to lead us out of the world brain. In fact, the duality of the two of them in opposition are driving us straight into it. And so what we're dealing with is mathematical constructs, and really a much larger philosophical question around sociobiology and like complexity theory of life as having autonomy and independence, but it's not how we commonly understand as ideological. So I know I say that all the time, but I think that's important. The collectivism is sociobiology, not communism, socialism per se. Okay, so okay. So the human race developing as the tip end of the vast brain nerve system of animate nature. Subtly united with his cosmic environment, man is moving on towards a higher biological social integration in which radio and television appear as precursors of the circulatory process of the emerging organism. So that's quite something, right? That radio and TV are the precursors of how we will be communicating, which, you know, now that you think about it, early on, I was talking about like Ian Akilda's at Georgia Tech and this idea of like a future of like cyber-physical computing systems with nanotech that we just think thoughts, right? And all of these, like the walls are just computer interfaces, that everything is computational, right? That it's not separate. And so, yeah, it goes from radio and television to invisible nanoparticles and infused with our bodies, really, very much so. Okay, such is perhaps the new concept of man that man is framing of himself. Okay, so I do, you know what, I want to take a second and I want to pull up something here. Let me just get. So this is something else I've been working on today. I think it's in the descent map. So I've been working a little bit on integral theory, and I know that some other people have too. Danny Katz and Emily Moyer and Sebs have all been looking into Ken Wilber. And not just Ken Wilber. I mean, he's probably the most prominent person at the time, because the earlier people have now passed. But they were building on this idea of spiral dynamics and cyclical cultural evolution. And this was initially posited by Claire Graves. Let me see. Here's Claire Graves. And so that's right here. And I want to pull up one more thing. So I thought it was interesting. Claire Graves, was a professor at Union College. And Union College is in upstate New York, in Schenectady, as a matter of fact. And it was really a center of physics research because at the time, Schenectady, which is here, this orange dot, was the headquarters of General Electric. And General Electric, they had a big research campus. And Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who was a brilliant man, and he was working on the alternating current, he actually was a leader in the technocracy space. And he was part of this Technical Alliance, Technocracy Incorporated. And so I think Claire Graves would have come later, but I think it's important to know the context of Union College in physics. And it was actually their radio station was the first radio station in the nation since 1920. So that was at Union College. And then there's something else, the dome of like the key, it's called the hex alpha. Like they have this, let me see, that's just telling you about the hex alpha. There, see, it's quite an amazing building, this dome. And this dome has something called a hex alpha. So it's quite a ritual type of building here. I think it was just like used for ceremonial space or something like that. It's not classrooms, but this hex alpha is up in the dome. And let me remind myself what the hex alpha was. The hex alpha is two interlaced equilateral triangles. It also has other names, including the hexagram, a name which is applicable to any six-line or six-sided figure. It also represents the six-pointed or blazing star. Solomon is supposed to have found the hex alpha a most potent talisman. There is a story that he confined a genie in a bottle by sealing it with the hex alpha, which is the reason for the device being known as the Seal of Solomon. It is not known why the Royal Arch adopted the interlaced triangles as the hex alpha being a Jewish symbol, nor does it enter into the Irish or Scottish ritual, but it is significant that circles interlaced, the triangles interlaced in both of them in conjunction are regarded as Christian emblems and the possible basis of many things taught in the chapter and at the table. So anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting that Claire Graves of the spiral dynamics and this sort of cyclical cultural evolution taught there. Now, it would have been after Steinmetz, but, again, it's not a big school. So that the influence in Schenectady of General Electric and the research and the physics, I think, comes into play, again, with spiraling. And, Steffers has done a lot of work on this idea of like spintronics and spin in the physics. And I can't pretend to understand what all of that is, but I do think that it's important. And so, I guess I wanted to bring this up because this idea of the new concept of man, that man is framing of himself. So the conscious evolution piece is really central. And so I was looking into the transpartisan movement because I think in some ways, oh shoot, you know what? Here, I forgot to do this. Sorry, here's my map, guys. I'm not great with it used to not have to push the transition button. So sorry. So here is Claire Graves. Over to here. Social spiral dynamics, Claire Graves. they were using the spiral dynamics in this transpartisan meeting in Denver. Now, transpartisanism is to bring the alt-right and alt-left together. And this started in the 1990s. And I put up a clip from Joseph McCormick and what they were doing in the Rogue Valley in Ashland with this idea of a populist town hall meeting. But ultimately, I think that the transpartisan movement, which is supported by New America over here, that they're going to use this with blockchain tokenization to create a new form of electronic government and like futarchy. That is what's coming next. And so I wanted to talk about this idea of conscious evolution because Barbara Marx Hubbard was at the summit in the Citizen Summit in Denver in 2009 with the Transpartisan. And, she was this founder for the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, as well as being a leading proponent in this idea of space travel in the night, space colonization, not just space travel, but space colonization in the 1970s. And in fact, after her death, this guy, Mark Gaffney, let me see where he's at. Mark Gaffney was taking over her legacy. And so he was actually connected with this Center for Integral Wisdom and working with essentially like some libertarians, this guy, John Mackey, who was the founding CEO of Whole Foods. And he was an early developer of this idea of conscious capitalism. And so this idea of the spiral, the integral wisdom, I think that actually now that I understand this idea of wisdom, they're using wisdom as a coded word a lot. It's connected to the wisdom of the crowd. And they're going to use sort of crowd-based sensing technology, I think, to harness the quote-unquote wisdom of the crowd for computational methods. And so I just sort of wanted to point out this idea of, the conscious evolution that humans are supposed to take part in how we evolve, right? And, and I'm not saying that we don't do better or we don't, evolve over time, but also in the mix was this guy, Michael Osterlenk. He was collaborating with Joseph McCormick. And I will just say that Mr. McCormick, if you look him up, someone was saying like Ashland was very liberal and progressive and all this stuff. But the guy who is behind transpartisanship, his father was a robotics aerospace robotics engineer. He went to Virginia Military Academy and was involved in Republican politics in Georgia, and then went on to, now he's based in China doing engineering work. So it wasn't like necessarily a progressive project. The guy that was working with him on that, his name is Jim Ruff. He was actually a consultant, like an organizational consultant that was working with, Boeing and Xerox and IBM. Right. So these were not just sort of hippy dippy people. These are very well connected, resourced corporate consultants, right? Working in transpartisanship. So Michael Osterlenk, I was sort of shocked when I looked up his background because he was trained in the integral theory and is sort of very much, I think, like in the background of integrated medicine, which again, on the surface, like I don't necessarily have a problem with, having, an integrated approach to health and wellness, but he's also working in body-oriented psychology, which I think is going to align with his embodied computing. He was working in energy medicine, in neurofeedback. He was a founder with Ken Wilber of this Integral Institute, and he was also working in spiral dynamics, and he describes himself as a transpartisan social entrepreneur who is a leading expert in transpartisan public policy, and that he was working on this Liberty Coalition that was working on civil liberties, privacy, and transparency, especially around medical privacy. And so what I'm sort of seeing in this patterning of sort of like a welding of sort of conservative outlooks, but also alternative health outlooks with data privacy is really about you going on blockchain and becoming a digital commodity. The transparency would be about what works, value-based healthcare, right? And this guy, he was also involved in, so he was working on the transpartisanship with Reuniting America, interested in non-ordinary states of consciousness and altered states of consciousness. And then he was a health coach and a optimization coach with SEAL Fit, with retired Navy SEALs, in this idea of the unbeatable mind and sort of mental fitness training and human optimization and online psychology training programs. And so, and this was back in 2008 or earlier that he was doing this work, again in sort of biohacking, right? Integral theory and conservative politics, and also on the one side asking for privacy and protections of privacy, but then on the other side knowing with blockchain what that's going to mean, like with mental health treatment and psychedelics and the other stuff. So it's sort of feeling like, now that I see where people are going, and I wasn't coming from the alt health space, and I'm not much of a joiner, and so this idea of like influencers and products and cross marketing and all of these things, like I'm just not that. Like I eat regular food and I don't do a whole lot of all these supplements and other things, but I'm seeing increasingly like there are some concerns around some of the products that people who are ostensibly for health and freedom, it's going to get complicated. So anyway, I want to say that because when this line is coming through about man, the new concept of man that man is framing of himself, I think we have to think of it in terms of the conscious evolution, the spiral dynamics, these influencers, these consulting parties of all stripes, conservative and progressive, and then how they feed into these alternative health markets. Because I've said this early on, the health crisis or whatever it was in that immediate moment, that was like the trauma bonding and the simulation modeling, and to get everybody lined up and to create these to reinforce these influencer networks. But what's the longer game is really wellness and biohacking. And and I don't really see a whole lot of people in that space. Like I would be interested if there are people out there that you see who are maybe their business is alternative health, but they're actively contesting the idea of a value-based payment system, of blockchain being used for medical records, and of like the nanotechnology, because I can see very much that the nanotechnology is going to be pitched as organic, right? If you come down to the molecular computer, it's all just molecules, right? So they could say anything is organic, but like slathering yourself in nano or drinking this nano, we don't even know like what it's exactly doing to us or what it's doing when it gets out into the environment. It goes through our body and then it gets out into the environment, what it's doing. So anyway, so that's what I'm thinking there. Okay, so back to the book. All right. So this conception not only lends a novel dimension to reality. Oh, did I? Sorry, guys. I'm trying to. Oh, sorry. I'm terrible with the buttons. I need Jason to help me out with these things. When I'm on my own, I'm not in a very good way. Okay. So this conception not only lends a novel dimension to reality, it presents us also with the unique conception of the meaning of history. According to the view we have sketched, the meaning of history is to be found in the onward and upward planetary spiral. Let me say that again. Okay. According to the view we have sketched, the meaning of history is to be found in the onward and upward planetary spiral towards the appearance of something completely new in social evolution, the development of a specific organ of civilization for mobilizing our energies and unifying social purposes. Wow. So that pretty much sounds like Protocol Labs, right? Like mobilizing energy, right? And unifying social purposes. So that's the blockchain smart contract. So I do want to just pop over here for a second and show you one other thing. Because somebody emailed me this and it was quite fabulous. So it was a paper by this guy Eric Schwartz, and it was on third order cybernetics. And so let me just show you. I just want to give a gander. So it's like a compilation of papers that he had, but isn't this something? Isn't this like an amazing thing? So, I mean, you look at my maps, right? Like this is this giant map, and I'll link this in the comments when we get, but it's conceptual. It's all different, like philosophical concepts that are shaping around systems theory, largely. He was a systems theorist, right? So we've got social cybernetics, psychobiology, technopsychology. Look, we've got Laszlo. I'm always talking about Laszlo. Look, we've got Skinner. But there are other things, like I haven't heard of Yevgraf Korolenko, Earth as Organism. I have heard of Vernadsky. So I'm going to put this in because I have this saved as a PDF. It's going to be page 9. But I think it's useful to look around and just see how far back, like Karl Pribram, holographic systems. It's really interesting to look and see, like once you start to have a vocabulary of the terms that are used in the concepts. Look, we have Donatella Meadows. She was Limits to Growth, Green Revolution, Borlaug, all sorts of this, like, and having a language for it and being able to sort of hook into who the people were and understanding that this is 80, 70, 80 years worth or more. I mean, some of this stuff goes back really early. If you go further down, they've got Aristotle and these other things. But definitely in the last 75 to 80 years, a lot of this has evolved. So I would say, for me, if you want to understand the structure, rather than hanging on every next like white paper that's coming out of the World Economic Forum or every next talk, like familiarize yourself with the larger history so that you could, like when you get new information, you can situate it, right? Like we've got electromagnetism. Like these are all of the things that the people who want to steer society, who want to steer us towards emergence and towards a new design, this is all the stuff that they're doing. So, anyway, I found this really wonderful. So thank you to the person who sent me Eric Schwartz. Very interesting. And I'll just include this. So, I just read here about the onward and upwards planetary spiral towards the appearance of something completely new, the development of a specific organ of civilization for mobilizing energy and unifying social purposes. So this isn't exactly the same as Graves, like he has, but it is a cycle, and he has, I think, 6 steps. Eric Schwartz, from vegetative life, although we love botany, so it's no shade on different stages of life, but vegetative all the way up. And I would say, like, so number 4 is logos, coherence, logic, science, and technology, merchant states, and democracy. So I would say the people who are putting this on are imagining that we are moving out of this phase, the logos, coherence phase of democracy, right? And we are moving into gnosis, which is interesting because there's also a Tao named gnosis, of consciousness, which is collective self-knowledge and a planetary cyborg. Okay? So that's the thing they're talking about. Like this is understood across many of these people who are working in the social sciences. There is an expectation that we are evolving into a planetary cyborg. It's not a secret. And then eventually, once we move on, then I guess the planetary cyborg is able to create itself. And I think that in some respects, this self-creation is like beyond God, right? Like we become our own gods, I guess, and we're just making stuff up as we go along. But this idea of consciousness is the focus of the 5th level, and they're definitely, this is a struggle. This is a struggle over a consciousness. So anyway, so I'll go back. So anyway, I hope you thought that was interesting. All right. Okay. So the biological forerunner of this collective organ for receiving from and dispensing to one and all is the central nervous system in individual organisms. Just as the cerebral cortex is the vehicle of the master reaction, which regulates the diverse and otherwise conflicting biological reactions. So, if we are to achieve a similar global strategy for mankind, we shall have to evolve a seat of intellectual social dominance, a world brain, to harmonize our multifarious economic political, and cultural activities. And so I'm just going to pause here and say, the difference between Reiser, so his whole idea is the world brain, that it's a unit, right? But I think actually what's coming is more like, it's everything I hear they're talking about now is bottom up, decentralized, emergent. So in fact, Levin, they're not so interested in the brain and the nervous system. They're interested in the bioelectricity between cells, because that, I feel like that has the most interesting potential for them to mobilize this new idea of existence that they're coming up with. So even though throughout the book we're talking about the world brain, I do think it's important at this point to think through that the presentation that is coming now, because of the nature of the organizing system, which is the distributed ledger technology, which is the blockchain, which is the smart contracts, which is distributed independent sensor network, I don't think that today's version is going to be imagined as a central nervous system and a brain per se. You could imagine it as the networks maybe within the brain, but not the brain itself. It's like a brain without a brain. Okay. We seriously propose that humanity must become, in fact, a biological social entity. When we consider this organism to be in relation to a developing world plan, it is as though one were seeing double. Yeah, so the planetary twin. Leo has talked a lot about that, the Microsoft planetary computer. Seeing double is the twin of life on the planet. As though two sets of global planning were going on at the same time, one subjective and the other objective. These two are in no sense antagonistic. On the contrary, they are supplementary. The first is a matter of developing an intuition or a feeling of the biological unity of mankind, and the second is a matter of translating this intuition of the oneness of humanity into a global social reality. And yeah, so that's kind of going back to the holographic aspects. We stress the fact that these two types of global planning must be carried out simultaneously, the ultimate goal being their convergence towards coalescence. At present, each marches to its own type of synthesis, the one type of planning, subjective, emotional, ideological, having for its goal a psychological, ethical harmony of head and heart. And so again, I just want to reemphasize the whole head and heart aspect. The heart-mind synthesis is going back to a lot of this biotech, neurotech, biofeedback stuff that, there's a lot of people in the alt health space pitching this, pitching these wearables as like being good for your health. The objective planning aiming at the social cultural unity of a global or world civilization. Both types of planning, subjective inner and outer, objective outer, must proceed together, step by step and side by side, just as the corticothalamic integrations via the cerebral hemispheres are unified to produce the subjectivity rounded patterns of the head-heart synthesis. So the cultural patterns of old-fashioned hemispherics, world islands, must be superseded by globalistics of the world brain and its accompanying planetary integrations. And so I would say that, within the polarization, like it is like in some ways, I feel like the name the globalist comes with a lot of baggage. And there is this tension that is being held between nationalism and globalism, right? Now, the metaverse is a global project. And so the people who are talking about nationalism as a material reality without taking into account the globalist nature of the metaverse, like if you think that you could be nationalist but still like wade into Web3 and that you can incorporate that into your nationalism. Like, I don't think that that's possible. And so for me, the question is, like, they want to subsume all of culture into one homogeneous computational layer, right? They're going to say we're all unified and therefore we all just are going to be the same. And I would say no. I mean, well, let me restate that. I think we're not necessarily going to be the same, but we're going to be subject to like the same sort of ideas. I don't know. Like, I'm still trying to figure this out, because I think that they talk about it like they want us to be the same, but I think for the computation, they actually need us to be different. So I'm of two minds about that. I will keep thinking on it. Okay. This idea of a global culture is the biggest single idea in the human mind today. To elaborate such a plan, we must evoke groups of individuals capable of visualizing this new approach to world problems. If they can discover how to work with the best of our scientists, they can then span the gap between the vast, emotionally illuminated, subjective global group and the objective, purposeful, intelligent, and tireless outer world government. The statement that subjective unification by way of the formulation of a mental fetus can be successful only to the extent that it helps to create and in turn reflects an objective synthesis of social perspectives, places a heavy load on planning, and is therefore necessary to say a few words on the topic of our attitude toward planning. And so as we get into planning, I think it's important to think about what Alison Duetman just said about the game, because I think in some ways the planning is going to happen through token engineering, through tokenomics in electronic government, through smart contracts layers, but they want it to be like a game. Like, I think because that's also part of the state of flow that they want everybody to have this state of flow. And so I think that this is when Michael Crow, and he talks about hanging out with Bill Gates and coming up with the idea that your education will be an ongoing game scenario, ongoing quests. It's this thing that is coming through, that they want planning, but they don't want it to be too difficult. They just want you to sort of fall into it and play the game and stay in the zone and not think about it too much. So I think the planning is going to be the melding of the smart contract into the built environment, into the computations, just like the clip that I was showing earlier. Okay, so the Stop Man movement. Stop Man, okay. These days, we hear a great deal about planning. There are literally hundreds of plans, big plans and little plans, political plans and economic plans, and so on. A survey of these proposals for the shaping of the future leaves one with the impression that many of these well-intentioned advocates of Reconstruction are really thinking in terms of outmoded forms of thought. And this again calls attention to the fact that our first reform should be in the underlying mental habits which guide the forms of thinking about any of our social problems. And so, so they're saying first we have to redo how our brains work. And this builds on the last chapter we were talking about yesterday about language. They kind of wanted to do a brain wiping and just like get rid of language and like use pictures. Use radio, use television, use virtual reality, get rid of language. Now, I do agree with them that language does structure how you think, but then like we're allowed to have a culture, right? Like people are allowed to think with different frameworks. And so like we don't want to just all be a tabula rasa and subject to the mathematics, but here they're talking about outmoded forms of thought and sort of mental hygiene, right? Getting rid of your underlying mental habits. And so I think like we have to understand the big push behind the primacy of mental health interventions and trauma as being part of this plan to reboot what is normal, right? The new normal, reboot our understanding of how society works, and that's going to be happening through the mental health system and through the social welfare system. And then there will be metrics attached to that for the impact finance space. So after studying some of the plans put out, it begins to appear that many so-called reformers have entered into a kind of unconscious conspiracy against man, what someone has already called a Stop Man movement. What many of these planners are really telling us is that you are free to propose any and all sorts of plans for reconstructing the world, parentheses, provided these plans don't challenge the existing structures of society or modify in any fundamental way the prevailing business, educational, political, or other vested interests. To be specific, one is especially depressed by the lack of creative imagination shown by educators in their attitude toward needed reforms in the field of education. And again, the reforms for education are going to be the learning economy, right? Like the new form of education is post-literate, post-language, engage with digital media and respond so that the machine can learn us. And that's the learning economy. And then we will be given credits like through our brainwave headbands. Now, if it is true, as one critic of our present intellectual leadership has asserted, that the contemporary liberal feels fragmentary and isolated in an alien and inscrutable universe, we face a gloomy future. What then we may expect from the less progressive individuals who do not pretend to be the thinkers of our society? Where then are we to find the leadership? If the scientific humanists are willing to try their hands at it, should they not at least be free from the charge of impractical idealism? Whatever one may say about the planetary socialism, it cannot be supposed that these dreamers of the future are lacking in confidence. But their optimism about the battle of man is a rational optimism, they believe. With their cheery, "Here comes tomorrow," they strike a much-needed note of hope. They light a candle of courage which may help dispel some of the dismay and confusion of the modern scene. But the scientific humanism calls for daring execution as well as noble thinking, for it holds to the proposition that for a long time to come, the human race is going to be confronted by problems such as no age or race of men has ever faced before. And, that's the trope, right? Every generation is faced by insurmountable problems, and yet we always seem to sort of still come through them. Okay, so instead of returning to our old way of thinking and of doing things, we must now enter upon an even more heroic era of mental reorganization and social readjustment. Our job now is to bring into play those morphogenetic forces which can guide the embryology of the future organism to be. Wow. Okay. So you know what? I think I'm going to pause here for a second, if I can. So let me, I want to pull up the Eisenstein thing. So, and I'm trying to remember. It's part of my first piece in the series. And included it in the bottom about gaming. Here we go.
One of the things we both...
All right. So here we go. Okay, so this is about the morphogenetic fields. And I think that this is really important to the idea of electrical signaling and communication at a social level. So just as a revisit, sorry, Sambar is not looking. So on the right is Sepp Kambar, and he was the guy from Wildflower Montessori. He worked on Google's personalization. They're updating their personalization algorithm, and he was in social dynamics at MIT Media Lab. And now he's with Cello, which is something that Leo has covered in quite great detail at Silicon Icarus about the digital money. Okay. And so there is Charles Eisenstein, and he is, an influencer in the sort of, health, freedom, thinking, yoga, mindfulness, various sort of spaces. And he's a Yale graduate, and they're going to talk about the morphic field. And so I think this is really important to keep in mind as we think about how this brain is going to be organized.
Talked about is this idea that was put forth by Walter Wink, who's a philosopher and theologian, and he said, like the founding myth of our of really like the last 2,000 years is this myth or a founding myth of these last 2,000 years is the myth of redemptive violence. And the example that he uses is Popeye, and he says, in every episode of Popeye, basically Bluto tries to abduct Olive Oyl. Popeye finds out, starts fighting Bluto. At a certain point, he's getting beaten badly. He eats his spinach. He gets strong, and he beats up Bluto and saves Olive Oyl. Good prevails over evil. Now, the downside to, and that myth is persistent everywhere, like movie lines, the way that we think about things like the war on poverty or the war on drugs or so on. But basically kind of what it misses is two things. One is nobody ever learns anything. I mean, Bluto never learns that it's not good to abduct Olive Oyl, and Popeye never learns to eat his spinach before getting into a fight instead of in the middle. And it also reifies the morphic field from which the first thing came from. Basically kind of the fight against X, like means and ends are the same. And so like fighting against whatever it is often leads to a world with more fight. And so you've talked about an alternative, morphic resonance, which I'd love to kind of close off by hearing your kind of quick thoughts on morphic resonance.
Yeah. So I discussed the myth of redemptive violence at length in an essay called Building a Peace Narrative. And I referred to Walter Wink's work in that. And identified, and this has been a theme in my work for a long time, the basic formula for change making that we kind of take for granted in this society, which is you identify a bad guy and then you defeat the bad guy by force. You can see this in US foreign policy. You can see this in a lot of the political discourse today. You can see this in health policy. What's the bad guy? What's the pathogen? What's the bad thing in myself? You see it in spirituality, even like this war mentality. And there's a lot of problems with it. One of which is that you never ask, why is the bad guy bad? Or what are the conditions that allow the bad guy to be so powerful? And in the economic sphere, you could ask, as you mentioned before, like, why are certain people seemingly so greedy? Like, what is the system that creates the apparent psychopaths that run a lot of corporations? Are they really psychopaths, or are they merely in a certain position in that game of musical chairs that sets them up to act like that? If you are always out about, okay, we're going to solve the problem by tearing down those bad guys, tearing down those awful people, those greedy people, those bankers, those this, that, and the other thing, you're never going to look at the system. You're never going to, and sometimes maybe you do have to fight Bluto, but if that's all you do, you're in endless war. So the principle of morphic resonance is one of the alternatives to solving problems through overcoming something by force. And the paradigm of overcoming by force, it's not only in our politics and Hollywood movies and stuff. It's also like at the core of what we understand to be technology, where you're moving masses around by exerting forces on them. And progress in technology means more and more accurately doing that with more and more force. That's called progress. And it hits the same kind of glass ceiling that we talked about earlier. Like, there are certain things you can do incredibly well that way. And there are certain areas that we are seeing in our society now where that way of engaging the world fails.
All right, so I'm going to just... All right, so I'm just going to say for a second, goes on for a bit longer, and I forgot that it was such a long clip, but I want to sort of point out, so they're setting up the parallel between by force or collective, like there's a collective change or a by force change. Now, I'm not a fan of force. Like, I'm not a go-to for redemptive violence either. And, I'm practicing very much, Cliffy keeps saying, like, looking for the bad guy with the hammers is not the way to do it. And I agree. Like, I think that's very problematic. But it's interesting that they're talking about peace and war and peace, right? So peace in the blockchain world means the homeostasis, means the balance. And I feel like ultimately what they're talking about in the morphic field is that you would program through sensor technology and tokenization the world as though it were like John von Neumann's automata grid, right? Like, these are the rules, and we have coded this for a good and proper society. And therefore, we can simply operate within the programming and everything will be fine. And then we won't have to go up against difficult situations or difficult people, because those people won't exist. It will be sort of fully decentralized, and it will be like good. And that this will happen through the beautiful money, which is the Celo, which is the blockchain. So anyway, I do think that there is something about bioelectricity and sociality that they are looking to harness. Like, I actually think that most people in the world are good. Like, I would say, and maybe we do need some sort of self-reflection on our social conditions that have led us to have this amount of like wealth inequality, or spend this much money on defense contracting, or crazy amounts of chemicals and things that we don't need. Like, there must be some reinforcement. And that's when I do say that this is emergent and distributed, like there must be some sort of reinforcements out there that do that, but I don't think we need to code it into a blockchain. I don't think we need to turn it into some sort of invisible, programmable, live action role play game in the world itself. Like, that's not the way it should be done, because who in the world would even be coding that, right? I resist the cybernetic tokenization of everything. So anyway, I'm just gonna, let me see how I escape. Oh, I guess it's not,
it doesn't produce.
Sorry, it's not letting me get out of here. Okay, there. All right, so, all right, I'm just gonna go back to the regular camera. All right, so thanks for bearing with me on that. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't mean to cancel. Sorry. Okay, so I'm still here. All right. So back to the book. All right. Where was I? Okay. Mental reorganization and social readjustment and the morphogenetic field. So again, I think that actually really does speak well to the Kamvar-Eisenstein clip about the social readjustment and how they might imagine it's happening now. They're not coming right out and saying, like, we have the tool that's going to help fix this so that we don't need redemptive violence anymore. We'll all just be coded to be polite and peaceful. I think that there must be some other way to do it that doesn't involve blockchain. So I'm still sticking with that. So in words, this is not difficult to phrase, but in actual accomplishment, this will be anything but easy. The condition of the world is such that only a theory, a mental fetus, adequate to the needs of the modern world can guide the formative process for the enormous job of development that lies ahead. Somehow we must learn how to weave an entire pattern of novel formulations or concepts into the existing body of our changing social structure. Visualize the framework of the emergent world federation, and then bring into being the as yet non-existent organism to be. The project we have outlined is indeed an ambitious one. Our undertaking involves the proposed demonstration that the next big development in the economic political evolution of our rapidly integrating world civilization, integrating, at least through technological media, is the fabrication of a world brain to serve as the vehicle of a coming planetary culture. There are already signs indicating that this necessity for a thoroughgoing reorientation is being recognized. Let us glance at several such omens. And so I will say, like, integrating. Like, there's like lots and lots of stuff related to, like, you know, all of this integral theory. Like, I feel like, you know, and I'll just sort of say it again, like with this bit here, you know, the Center for Integral Wisdom, I think the integration, now they're talking about that we need to sort of just integrate our better selves and to be like, again, the human potential movement, right? Like this optimization. But do I think that Ken Wilber knows about the Oliver Reiser? Like, I don't think so. But there is the underlying current of optimization in this that is central to the cybernetics. So again, just thinking that the integral integration is part of the emergence convergence. Okay. All right. So, all right. Okay. All right. So, section 3, the psychic unification of mankind. All right, because this is something like, this is part of the collective, the collective. Okay, one of the hopeful signs in the world is the increasing recognition that the ailments of our civilization are not the consequence of a military crisis which was suddenly thrust upon us by our enemies who attacked us. Through the perspective of time, we see now that the crisis in our culture has been coming to a head over a considerable period of time. And still the various nations of the world face many of the major problems that have plagued the modern world for decades. It is clear that the period of intellectual social reconstruction is by no means at an end. Aside from that, it is noteworthy that many of us also realize that one of the depressing shortcomings of our world has been the forces of separation, which set up barriers between men, have all too frequently been stronger than the forces of attraction that harmonize and unite. It is now clear that one of the defects of our civilization has been the ever-present tendency towards what Professor A.N. Whitehead calls bifurcations. For example, the splitting of a theory and a practice, the separation of the world of facts as studied by the scientists and the world of values as projected by moralists, preachers, social reformers, politicians, and the like. Science and morality, labor and leisure, culture and politics, thought and action, man and nature, mechanism and purpose, these are some of the dualities generated by our culture. This cultural atomism corresponds closely to the splitting of intellect and emotion, reason and feeling by traditional elementistic psychology, and has provided the prototype for the educational atomization of a curriculum which first departmentalizes human interests and activities and then teaches subjects as independent entities. It is not surprising that with such piecemeal analysis we end up educationally with confusion through lack of integration, while socially we are left with what someone has called a cultural schizophrenia, in which those who have the knowledge don't have the power, and those who have the power don't have the knowledge. Our leaders, the intellectuals, and not the politicians, map out in theory the course which our changing civilization should take. But these intellectuals have not been able to tap the emotional reserves of human nature. In society, the liberals have been unable to dramatize the program of democracy. Indeed, they have sometimes despised those very areas of human nature, our emotional reservoirs, which dictators with their monopolistic control of the instruments of propaganda have been able to release so effectively and employ in such socially harmful ways. One aim of the program of scientific humanism is to find out how to make society sane, through an understanding of science, and how to make science humane by catching it up in a broader extra-scientific movement towards a more inclusive whole, a world federation or a universal community, the creation of which can only be achieved as we succeed in fusing intelligence and emotion, or logic and love, as Mary Everett Boole visioned it. Such a unification of scientific, religious, and social motivations will help us overcome the present detrimental dualism in our society of a sterile intellectualism and an irrational emotionalism. But, we repeat, only a world picture painted afresh by the hand of the artist-scientist, freeing man from slavery to theoretical materialism, as well as an industrial mechanism, can in this generation inspire us to strive anew towards the assimilation of logic and love united in the control of human life. Okay, so logic and love in the control of human life. All right. The elements of this planetary synthesis are already in existence. Well, you know what? I do want to. I'm gonna do one more thing here. So, Steffers, she shared with me a paper. So I'm just gonna pull over. This is the Integral Institute was Ken Wilber, and for me it's quite interesting that he's based in Denver. So this is him over here. So Ken Wilber is in Denver. He created the Integral Institute, and then there was a spin-off so the Integral Institute was, I guess, a nonprofit, and the Integral Life is a for-profit enterprise to promote the ideas of integration. And the guy who is leading that, his name is Rob Smith, and I'm just going to pull up his some images from his LinkedIn because I think they're pretty interesting. So wait a minute, I should start from the bottom up. Okay, so pretty much right out of school, like within 3 or 4 years, he became the co-founder of Nevada Nano. So this is 2003, 2004, which is really early. And it says that Nevada Nano manufactures microelectromechanical systems, or MEMS, sensor modules for commercial and government applications. And that they have a patented sensor technology that was supported by DARPA, specifically for Internet of Things gas sensing. And that he was the director of this Nevada Ventures Nanoscience program at the University of Nevada, Reno. And they were working on weapons sensors for the world's best new defense technology. So right out of the gate, he's starting with nanotechnology. And then he was in charge of something called Alair Medical, which he describes as the largest disease management company in the world. And then sort of became the CEO of the Integral Institute, again, working on new models of corporate governance and world governance with the United Nations, emerging monetary regimes, and new religious interpretive systems and performing arts. So he definitely seems like the kind of guy who would, like Oliver Reiser, would be interested in, had in mind, maybe. And then he went on to be part of this vertical Development Academy, which was an assessment essentially for world leaders based on the maturity profile. And he had something called the Chrysalis, the world's transformational learning program, a digital coach in your pocket to build behavioral micro skills. And then most recently is working, like, again, for Integral Life. But he was a partner in something called Echelon Scientific, that's early stage semiconductors and complex chips for defense, biomedical, MEMS, and quantum computing. So this is the kind of guy who's connected to the integral stuff, right? It's not just like, whatever. But Steffers did share with me that there was this is an article in Integral Life where he's actually Rob Smith is doing an interview with Ben Goertzel. And the interview is titled Loving AIs, Bringing Unconditional Love to Artificial General Intelligence. And so when they're talking about love and logic, I mean, this is the example of it, right? Like, they're already imagining that somehow they're going to imbue love into Sophia the humanoid robot or what have you. I mean, this is a conversation that they were having. This article is from 2017, so it's not even that recent. But when they're talking about control, the assimilation of logic and love united in the control of human life. I mean, I think that should just give us all pause. Okay, so the elements of this planetary synthesis are already in existence. They have been presented at various times and in various places by many teachers of mankind. It is the weaving together of the threads of a new pattern of thought which constitutes the task of the coming generations. If one were given to plagiarism by anticipation, one might easily enunciate some of the basic principles of this coming cultural synthesis. Here, surely, are some of the constituent notes in the new world harmony. And again, it's interesting how he keeps bringing in music. Okay, some building genes of the world body, section 4. The new world organism will, of course, take the principle of evolutionary development for granted. But unlike mechanistic theories of evolution, this conception will find the moving force behind the evolutionary advance in invisible morphological fields of force, which bend the arc of growth towards wholeness formations. So again, thinking about bioelectricity and social physics, morphological fields of force, and then how is that force applied? Is that applied through distributed ledger technology? And I think that the mechanistic version of evolution, like that's the neo-Darwinian, but I think really more and more what we're going to be talking about is Lamarckian evolution, where acquired traits are carried forward. Starting with the most elementary configurations, those in which electrical units are organized in atoms, we find these guiding fields moving towards higher dynamic organizations, which culminate in a human brain with its currents of thought emerging from neural configurations of indescribable complexity. Such a theory might well build on the speculations of Dr. R.M. Buck, who in his book On Man's Moral Nature surmised that the basic emotions of man are four: fear and hate, faith and love, while in the interplay of these emotions lies the secret of man's moral nature. This theory, formulated quite some time before the newer theories of endocrinology, would accept as a fact that there is an inner bond of causality between the sympathetic nervous system, the internal secretions, and the individual character. For us, however, the most interesting feature of Dr. Buck's view is the implication that the moral nature, as it develops and modifies the functional pattern of the nervous system through enhancement of emotions of love and faith as opposed to fear and hate, so that those who have strong moral natures are the type likely to experience the mutation of illumination and carry forward the psychic revolution of the human mind. Wow, that's pretty intense. I'm just going to read this again. So they're talking about, okay, so such a theory might well build on the speculations of Dr. R.M. Buck, who in his book On Man's Moral Nature surmised that the basic emotions of man are four: fear and hate, faith and love, while in the interplay of these emotions lies the secret of man's moral nature. This theory, formulated quite some time before the newer theories of endocrinology, would accept as a fact that there is an inner bond of causality between the sympathetic nervous system, the internal secretions, and the individual's character. For us, however, the most interesting feature of Dr. Buck's view is the implication that the moral nature, as it develops, modifies the functional pattern of the nervous system through enhancement of the emotions of love and faith as opposed to fear and hate, so that those who have a strong moral natures are the type likely to experience the mutation of illumination and carry forward the psychic revolution of the human mind. So I just want to think about that for a second. The morality. It's interesting here. Let me pull up. Let me see. Oh, it's in the descent. Okay, so I'm still in the right map. Okay, so we're leaving Oliver Reiser. We're going up to Oliver Goodenough. So it's interesting because the morality, I've seen stuff, and I think I mentioned it last time, that the environmental social governance, I think, is going to go beyond just ESG and move towards a moral economy. And this guy, Oliver Goodenough, he's married to a woman, Alison Clarkson, who is the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, not the U.S. Senate, the state Senate in Vermont. He was a lawyer. I believe that he actually got his degree at Penn, his JD at Penn, and he might have been in entertainment law, but he is a major advocate of this idea of the moral market. And what was kind of concerning for me is that he was linking together morality and neuroscience and evolution studies, which I had never seen those things put together before until I just read this. I literally just read this. It's kind of interesting. And so and they were part of the Law Lab. And again, the Law Lab, his co-director of the Law Lab was John Clippinger. who worked with Sandy Pentland over at the MIT Media Lab. And this open mustard seed platform is an early digital identity from 2013 format with this thing called the trusted compute cell. So Sandy Pentland is all about social dynamics. John Clippinger is sort of putting together Web3 tokenization. He's working with Goodenough at this law lab at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet of Harvard that was pretty much funded by the Kauffman Foundation, and the Kauffman Foundation is behind the human capital impact finance market. And and he is bringing together this idea of the neuroscience and morality and evolution as part of a moral markets. And let me see if that actually, I'm just going to show, this is a book that he was a part of, the critical roles of value in the economy. And so what I'm hearing Reiser saying is that he literally imagines that the way in which our nervous system is managed, that people who fit what is understood as a moral character, now like that's questionable how you would qualify that, because I think many, it's not always clear what's moral and what's immoral given the last couple of years, but that somehow the people that are more moral or following those rules will be more inclined psychically to be part of this unitary consciousness. And so in that respect, whether or not you believe that you can come up with just one program of what morality looks like, this idea of wedding it into the economy is really important. And let me see if I can find. So this is the other thing. This guy, Robert Hartman. So I haven't really written up Robert Hartman yet, but he was connected to the Foundation for Integrated Education. And ultimately, Reiser was part of this with Fritz Kunst and Julius Stolman, and Hartman was a member of that. And so this is an institute that he founded. It's actually in Tennessee. It's in Knoxville, so it's very near. I think UT Knoxville is where he was affiliated with Hartman. He was a professor there, and he was about value systems. And in fact, he was essentially the guy who was like listed at like the structure of values, scientific axiology, and the freedom to live. His name wasn't originally Hartman. It was something else. He was a Jewish Catholic guy who left in the lead up to World War II, and he picked a new name, and he actually chose the name Hartman. And again, Hart, it's H-A-R-T, but he picked that name, and he's known as the father of profit sharing and the 401k. And so this idea of harnessing markets into a morality, right? Harnessing the financial markets, harnessing this idea that you will have money to live after you retire, your 401k, into a market that's linked to morality. Like, it never would have occurred to me before that it was going to be linked to psychical aspects. Like, that's just really interesting to me. And I do remember value theory. So it is, let's see, one of the two living authorities on value theory. And he created this institute for applied axiology, which is about applying values and value systems and morality. It's not value as in money, it's value as in being a moral person, the knowledge of good, being a good person. So it's kind of blowing my mind right now just to sort of imagine that like Hartman and the value theory and the 401k and the profit sharing could be linked into like a larger psychical program. Although, we shouldn't be totally shocked by that because, Kunst, with the theosophy and stuff, like psychical research was really central to all of this. But yeah, interesting. Robert Hartman. Okay. So in this matter, we establish contact with the contemporary thesis of Julian Huxley that the channel of evolution is now through man, and in man through the further development of supra-physical faculties. And so that's, again, that we're going back to protocol labs, right? They want to give us superpowers. Everybody superpowers. So this line of speculation lends support to the view that an individual may be able to refine his own physical organism to the point of gaining a new freedom. This theory of self-evolutionary development towards a freedom which results from the individual, quote, taking thought, thereby bringing new patterns of electrical action currents into existence, poses some interesting questions. Now, again, that's getting back to the bioelectricity, right? Can an individual deliberately, by taking thought, coerce the evolution of his own nervous system towards the elaboration of some more readily responsive cells? Can a man's mind create through these fields of influence levels or types of brain cells with their own substance, and thereby set in motion approximations in the outer world of that underlying self-generated pattern? Could the collective minds of human individuals create a new society, mold their own collective future, and bring us into being counterparts of the inner worlds of all of us? Wow. So that's about focus. And, the folks at Foundation for Integrated Education, way back, they were very much interested. Again, Kunst was a theosophist. He started off in Adyar, so they were very focused on India and meditation and meditative practice. And if you don't mind, I'm going to pop back over to the Pegasus Park. And just, again, think about all of the health people who are selling everybody on wearables, right? Like biofeedback devices. So, the brain training, it's the neurofeedback, right? It's the EEGs, it's the Heart Math Institute, all of that stuff that's coming, and the wearables. And because they want entrainment, they want mind-heart entrainment. And so I just want to sort of pull, this is in the Dallas map. Capital One has, I don't know if it's their headquarters, but they're a major office in Plano, north of Dallas. Capital One, George Overholtzer here, he was one of the key people in setting up impact finance early on through the Nonprofit Finance Fund and later Third Sector Capital Partners. In North Dallas, they had a summer camp called Math Corps. And so, again, these are often, promoted for, kids, disadvantaged kids, right? Poor kids in public school get to go to summer math camp at Capital One. Now, Capital One in Plano is doing a whole lot of AI. And, I'll just point out that a lot of these are, children of color. And they've got, here you can see these brainwave headbands on them, all right? So you can see what they have on their head. It is one of these EEG devices. And what they're doing, let's see, you can see in this one, they're looking at a screen and they're supposed to be making art with their mind. So they've got this on and they're going to make art. And to me, this seems like a lot of can you elaborate? Can you use your mind to evolve your own nervous system, which is kind of what this feedback is, right? Like you're concentrating and you're changing your neurological system, right? They say it's about making art, but really is actually about controlling these kids' brainwave patterns. And it's called Brain Tone, and that's the company is Brain Tone Art. I think the person who actually set it up had a background from the U.S. Air Force, and they're saying create art from your brain. And it's almost, let me see what the gallery. So these are some of the artistic images that you put on the EEG headband, and then you make art with your mind. And this is what, and then it gets print out with a QR code. And so my thought is that once they refine these technologies, and, we go back to thinking about the NVIDIA, let me see, I'm going to play this NVIDIA clip. Because I just think it's really important. I've played it before, but
and then we have,
oh no, sorry, I can't play that one. It's the wrong one. But they want you to make art with your brain. They want to put a QR code on it. I think in the future this will be like children having an AI assistant for their imagination, and that will be used to build the metaverse. And the idea of having a QR code printed out on the art means that you would have credit, right? Like there would be a credit assignment. And so, the credit that happens like in the future for your intellectual property of your contributions to the metaverse, like that would be a payment system. And so, okay, so we've got brain tone. It's linked to, let's see, let me see if they have a picture of the, I guess it's just, it has a QR code. And NeuroSky are the devices. And so these are also with, they're biometrically enabled. Look, so biosensor solutions. These are all of the different kinds of things they're using them for, like virtual reality, meditation, mental effort, health related. And they've got these tiny biosensors. And oh, look, you can sleep with them on. You can track your sleep. You can be in virtual reality. You can track your wellness. Clock in with your telemedicine. That's what the NeuroSky is about. And then, and then they've got the investors in this include SoftBank. They had a partnership with Mattel. So Mattel is connected to this EEG program, and it's also used for neuromarketing, right? And then actually Berkeley, their School of Information, used it for a research study where it was actually your login. The computer can identify you by your thoughts, and you would have the headset there. And these are just consumer grade EEG devices. And instead of remembering your password, you would just have a certain thing that you would think about. And so like that's how it would go with the brain entrainment. And so anyway, I just wanted to point this out with capital One because it's part of, it's linked in with the collective impact. Dallas is working like very deeply, the United Way, and it's all, good and social justice and happy, right? That we're mining, inner city kids for their brainwaves in this gamified atmosphere to make art when it's not really about that. It's about getting them to start to participate in these executive function mind control projects. So, okay, so back to stuff. All right, super physical. That is fascinating. Okay. All right. Could the collective minds of humans create a new society, mold their own collective future, and bring into being counterparts of inner worlds of all of us? So remember, I just said about the AI assistant for kids, their imaginary worlds would go into AI. And that's what he's saying. Would we have a collective future and bring our inner worlds to everyone? And that's it. That's it exactly. Can we, through the potency of an organismic and emergent sociality, set in motion the action currents by means of which new political structures would come into objective being? So new political structures, that's, I think, part of this, again, a global governance, e-government protocol. And a lot of it is going to be based on consensus. And that's the thing I want to point out with Wilbur being in Denver and having this overlap of the spiral dynamics with the transpartisan movement. The transpartisans are all about consensus because they're like, okay, so you can be from different political parties, but we're going to find common ground and we're going to agree to things. And so let's find our common ground. And I think the process for finding the common ground will probably be through some sort of app type system. So let me just, I'm gonna pull that over again for a sec. And I just want to bring up the Wilbur part. Because we're back to the integral theory stuff. And I want to point out that, so here we've got Rob Smith, the nanotech guy from Reno, who hangs out with Ben Goertzel talking about AI and love. He was also with the IONS, the Noetic Sciences Lab. And so one of the spin-outs that they have was this something called the Institute of Applied Meta Theory. So everything, it's so jargony. I wouldn't take it that seriously except for, I don't know, one of these people who's involved in the, Institute for Integral Wisdom is some sort of really slick, like organizational coach, but they said that he was involved with like coaching Mark Benioff at Salesforce and also Ray Dalio of Bridgewater. So like, I guess you kind of have to take it seriously, even though it just seems so bogus. But so they have this Institute for Applied Meta Theory. And one of the things that they're working on was like a crypto token for a transformational movement. Now, this is based like in Boulder. So again, Colorado is the blockchain central place, right? So they want to use cooperative economic communities for crypto tokens for social movements. And, you know, I keep saying, I feel like the crassness of the crypto market is being intentionally built up to back out into this cooperative economics, right? It's this FTXs of the world that get propped up, and the, you know, Bored Ape or whatever NFTs that get propped up, and then eventually they'll get it back and say, well, you know, this distributed ledger technology is simply a tool, and we can use it for good. And if we're going to use it for good, we would have crypto tokens for cooperative economics. And then this guy, so they actually have an integral social sector initiative led by this guy, Josh Leonard, who came out of the YMCA. And the YMCA is very much connected to the collective impact space. So, you know, they're looking at integrating very likely social impact finance into this space. And so it's connected to like tokenomics. So Josh Leonard previously, so here's Josh. He's a seasoned social impact organizational leader with lots of expertise, and his background is with the YMCA of San Francisco, no less, right? So a lot of the out of school time stuff and probably the health and wellness stuff will be coming out of the Ys. And then he was part of this Institute for Cultural Evolution. Again, Reiser keeps talking about the evolutionary part. And so I can't help but think that this is going to be like consensus. This idea of cultural evolution, they're working on, this is in Boulder, our developmental approach to politics, invitations to all sides, like the daily evolver, like they're going to evolve themselves through consensus-based tokenomics, I think. And again, you know, when we think about, you know, Ethereum, Lubin, you know, his thing is consensus. I don't know. Let me see if I can get the other one up here. And let me the token engineer. Yeah, the token. Yeah, let me just zoom into consensus so you can sort of orient. All right, so yeah, so we've got the Ethereum Foundation here, and Joseph Lubin, was among the co-founders with Buterin. And so this is the stuff that's mediating the real world interface is the smart contract layer, right? But consensus is a really central part of this, and it's through this Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, their founding members, and they've got the play to earn decentralized apps. You've got the crypto wallets. You have decentralized app development. You've got blockchain as a service, digital asset supply chain monitoring. They're either acquired or funding all of these things: data analytics platforms, quorums, code DeFi, decentralized finance. They incubated Gnosis. Remember, I mentioned about Gnosis before. Prediction markets. And so all of this stuff related, this Shruti Appiah worked as a researcher for them, and she was involved with Internet of Input Output Hong Kong and the Santa Fe Institute on artificial economies. So all of this stuff is based on token engineering and consensus. And so like when I see things like collective social impact, coordination, crypto tokens, I'm feeling like it's going to definitely have to be consensus. And then the other aspect of the consensus thing is, let me just pull up this other one, is the sociocracy. And I mentioned that a couple times, but that sort of dates back to this Quaker stuff. And it's going to be connected to civic tech. Oh, not sociogram, sociocracy. Sociocracy, yeah. Governance by collective decision making. So we've got this over here, and it's linked to Gerhard Endenberg, who was a Dutch engineer and who was a Quaker. And so sociocracy was this way of like coming to consensus. And I've often felt like essentially, the Quakers are kind of, playing a key role in all of this. But this idea of consensus making through tokens is, I can totally see civic tech and apps and e-government being meshed into sociocracy and being framed as collectives. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of put that all together so that we were thinking about the consensus stuff. All right, let me go back. Right. And okay, so all right. So can the individuals, change up their brains to can they create the new society? All right. I'm just looking to. Okay. Pardon me if I repeat on some of this. Could the collective minds of human individuals create a new society, mold their own collective future, and bring into being counterparts of the inner worlds? Yeah. So that's the AI. Can we, through the potency of an organismic and emergent sociality, set in motion an action currents by means of which new political structures would come into objective being? So I feel like that's it, like this idea of transpartisan sociocracy consensus and civic tech apps. If indeed biological evolution is anticipatory, does the immediate future already exist in potentiality on a subjective level? And if so, is the time lag between human creativity on the subjective level and the objective world merely the lag between the pattern world of thought, the guiding fields, and the physical world? Moreover, if this be so, does the brain evolve physically into more responsive cells in order to cut down the inertia between patterns of thought and material configurations, an inertia which now constitutes the basis for the lack of alignment between subjective and objective worlds, so that the ideal thinker, when he arrives, will be up to date to the extent that, for him, there will be a synchronization between the subjective and objective worlds. So I guess that's sort of this idea of like using your mind to make your reality. I don't know exactly how that would work. I mean, I know there are people who practice this sort of mindfulness, but seems kind of out there, but I never know. Like I mean, at this point, I don't put anything out of the range of possibility. Finally, it should be possible to build up a kind of world mind out of fields of influence correlated with individual human brains, produce, in short, a world sensorium for the global civilization we suppose is in progress of emerging from the Earth organism. Is it possible that this planetary government already exists as a subjective reality in the collective idealism of an upward striving humanity, which is even now in the progress of precipitating its objective counterpart? Judging by the pleasure creative personalities have testified to when their work achieves some measure of universality, can we perhaps already sense the wider world consciousness being generated by men of goodwill who work and plan for a universal humanity? And I would just say at this point, it's all these hedge fund people making bets. So I'm just not really seeing them as men of goodwill. But okay. Is it possible that the subjective planetary humanism, the field of influence of liberated minds, has already been so integrated with the spearheads of developed individuals in our society that it has, so to speak, an embryonic embodiment? And I would say, like, this idea of liberated minds, like, where are the liberated minds? I can't see, like, I don't feel like there are very many minds that are liberated. I feel like we're really, like, most minds are really highly, highly controlled. If this subjective planetary government even now provides a kind of mental fetus for a coming universal civilization, how long will it be before this matured global humanism will be ushered in? In that day, when it has arrived, should we not celebrate the occasion with a kind of coronation ceremony for planetary democracy? Again, the coronation stuff kills me, right? Does the coming president of the Federation of Friendly Nations, or whoever it is who will personalize the peak of human evolution, already have his station in the social world, ready to head the Federation when the days of peace and social healing have done their work? Who will it be? And I have to say, I put in, I don't know if you can see, I said, Elon Musk, LOL, question mark. Who will it be? The head of the Friendly Federation. Someone still relatively unknown. Whoever it will be, he is probably someone, right? We have at least heard of, perhaps someone whose voice is familiar, whose record and ideals are known to us. In any case, many of the lesser ranks of leaders, the World Cabinet, the global organizers, are living and working with us now. Mature men and women, experienced each in his own field and ready to take his place in the adventure. Here in the subjective idealism of a group with universal interest, working out the form of a philosophical viewpoint as a basis for long-term planning, we already have the beginnings of a new world government. The future is a matter of recognizing these groups and their functions. Will the slow and steady steps of evolving men we march on from the subjective hierarchy, the isolated and advanced individuals who for long generations have held the vision of a united world, to the objective actualized federation of ministries which will provide leadership and authority. Let me see how long this is. Okay, there's one more section. All right, I can do this. Problems and plans. Many problems will arise in the course of our investigation. Any such broad project dealing with economic, political, educational, and ideological basis for world unification is not likely at the outset to provide satisfactory answers to the many problems set for it. Now, I will say, like, if you look at that scope, that's the UN SDGs, right? Like, economic, political, educational, and ideological. They don't, like, necessarily have health in there, but that's pretty much the scope of it. A complete treatment will present us with a major problem of semantics. How, if humanity is to acquire an organismic unity, can we human beings learn to communicate with each other across the barriers of race, nation, religion, language, and the rest, and speak to each other in friendliness? Understanding one another is not merely an intellectual matter, a cortical function. It is also a matter of being able to feel with one another. And how shall we learn to do that? Now, I would say this is actually kind of interesting, like the feel with part, because like the UN has been working on virtual reality, like for empathy. Like that's what they're actually really working on, is empathetic. Like the feeling of empathy is really important to them. It's even like a social impact market. Like why would you create a virtual reality of a refugee camp and have people walk through it, or create virtual realities of people being traumatized and then put you in it so that you can empathize? It's actually building that like feeling in, like your ability to project your feeling into things. So I think that that's really important, this idea of feeling. And then like they're looking for a nonverbal means of energetic communication. And how shall we learn to do that? Okay. Another important problem is the ideological problem of tolerance raised by regionalism or the cultural diversity of peoples. How much variability of viewpoint may we tolerate in the world of tomorrow? I'm just going to repeat that. How much variability of viewpoint may we tolerate in the world of tomorrow? And so I would say like that has everything to do with fake news and ghosting and deplatforming and control, like lack of freedom of speech, because they don't actually want there to be very much variability in how you think. This is a difficult question, and yet it's obvious that the cultural diversity of now independent groups must give way to some more inclusive world federation through which men of goodwill may plan the patterns of intercourse and meaning for the universal community, right? So, right. I mean, essentially they want a homogenous world, which is, to me, like that's anathema. Like we're our own beings. Like we should be celebrating. Like that's the irony, is that the people who are going to pull this off are the people who are the most about diversity and identity politics. It's ridiculous. There is no question about it. The world is going to change. And if we want to control and guide that change, we must engage in the mental anticipatory experimentation with the kinds of reforms we shall have to initiate in our programs of reconstruction. To bring about a better world, we need plans. Just as an architect or an engineer needs a plan, so those who are rebuilding our world need plans. Sound structures are not built without sound theories. The building of a social structure, no less than the application of scientific method in an airplane design, involves some experimentation. So we need plans for a better world. We need a mental fetus to guide the embryological development of our emerging world organism. To envisage such an ideological form is an important matter. To put it to practical test is also important. In the remaining paragraph of this chapter, we shall outline this theoretical framework of scientific humanism, which we have dared to hope may serve as the mental fetus for the new world. Following this, in subsequent chapters, we shall suggest some practical applications of the theory. And so I'm going to take a second just to see if I can find this this image, because I've been working on sort of trying to navigate this stuff with the artificial morphogenesis. And let me just media. I'm trying. I have like so many of these things that I've been putting in programmable architectures. I think this might be it. Let me see. What? It's blocked? How can you block my own stuff? That doesn't really make any sense. Oh, shoot. Well, I guess I can't get to it. Darn it. It's this, blocked by client. Well, I'm not sure what that's about. All right, well, I give up. But anyway, René Dorset, essentially what they were talking about was this, when they're talking about architecture and needing a plan, in this artificial morphogenesis, what they're imagining is essentially this bottom up, like programmable matter, and that it will be organic and there will be certain rules. So like this idea of biomimicry or bio-inspired design, that they will have things self-build. And so they actually talk a lot about this idea of having a, like not having an architect. Like the architect doesn't actually lay out all the parts with a specific plan. It says what the outcome is, like what is needed, and then some general parameters, and then the thing like makes itself up like magic. I mean, that's actually, so it's interesting when he's talking about needing an architect and needing a plan for reconstruction, is everything that I'm seeing now is that they're planning for it to be distributed and bottom up. Okay, a manifesto of scientific humanism. Today, the world needs desperately a theory to serve as an underpinning for a new way of thinking and living. Convinced that what is required is a modernized cosmology which places humanity within the framework and focus of the planetary context, we present the following propositions as a statement of the philosophy of scientific humanism. 1. Man is a natural creature living in a natural universe. Doesn't seem like that's where things are going. He has made his appearance, however, not through chance or by accident, but contrary to obsolete materialistic theories, the vast stellar universe provides the fitting backdrop to the drama of a planetary evolution. As the tip end of biological evolution up to date, man has emerged from the creatures who adapt themselves to nature and become self-directing agents that recreate that nature to serve the needs of his own self-evolution. And so I would say this idea of like a self-directing agent that recreates nature to serve the needs of his evolution is very much about this like synthetic biology, biotechnology, bioreactor, like deglobalization framing that we're getting, is that like you can just take the molecules of nature and remake them to whatever you need because we're the supreme beings who are evolving into being godlike or something. From now on, we must become more planetistic in our thinking. There are in the world not gods and men, masters and slaves, but human beings in various stages of development, all born of the earth organism. Accordingly, men must draw their strength from the untold resources of our planet, right? So that's extractivism. The invigorating rhythms of the seasons, the vibrant zest of the northlands, the ecstasy of the fertile prairies, and the lush familiarity of the tropics, the shimmering expanses of the inland waters, the cadence of the seven seas, and the configurations of the drifting continents. 3. Scientific humanism, however, is not exclusively earthbound in its survey. If, as planetism believes, the earth vibrates in our present geopolitical relationships, it is no less true that the steaming trail of protoplasm, which has its birthing in the sea below, has climbed into the sky above. Thus, the future, no less than the past, exerts its compulsions upon the developing present. The fabric of living tissue, cross-webbed as it is with planetary history, does not reach its final pinnacle of evolution in the present psychozoic age of man. Psychozoic age of man. The last act of the drama still remains to be written, and man himself now writes the play in which he is at once author, actor, and producer. And I would say, like, this goes back to this part with Huxley. 1 second, I just want to that this idea of, oh no, that's not it, sorry, is it descent? Oh, there was two, I think there's two Huxleys in here. Yeah, it's up this way. That, like, man is the sole curator of evolution in the universe. Like, that we are in charge of all the stuff. And gosh, I thought that this was like the sole arbiter of the universe, that we had it all under control. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm not finding this part of the, oh, I guess it's in here. The purpose and philosophy. Yeah. So this was Julian Huxley. The evolutionary progress we find is directed towards an increase of the characteristics. And then it goes on. Furthermore, he is not merely the sole heir of past evolutionary progress, but the sole trustee for any that may be achieved in the future. From the evolutionary point of view, the destiny of man may be summed up simply. It is to realize the maximum amount of progress in the minimum amount of time. And that's what was happening through UNESCO. And, you know, I feel like that is very much on target, but is in contrast to like the philosophies of, say, a John Trudell about being good relatives, or Robin Wall Kimmerer, right? That man is not at the pinnacle, and actually we should have some humbleness because we don't know all of the things, right? But these people, starting with all, you know, not necessarily starting with Oliver Reiser, but, you know, going all the way back, that, you know, they've planned that we're going to be the ones running the evolutionary train. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And I think that this idea of climbing into the sky, like that's space travel. That's Barbara Marx Hubbard. Pioneering along the frontiers of social change comes natural to the scientific humanist. Accordingly, he offers the impetus of his movement as one spearhead of social advance. The scientific humanist is committed to the challenging adventure of being ever more globalistic, of becoming the time binder. That's interesting, the time, as well as the space conqueror of our planet. But he realizes that the symphony of continents cannot be a one race or one nation recording. Thus far, only a few overtones have been caught, only a few themes have been written. And this is interesting, going back to the musical stuff, right? In the writing of new scores and even the simplest melodies, we have to face factors and issues which disturb old habits of thought and ancient evaluations. More attention must be given to technique, for global harmonies require global notation. And again, I think it is this notation, like, what they're looking for is a code of social evolution, a code of interaction of life to program life from, like, the nano level to the population level. Like, and it is a grammar, and it is a code or an annotation. And it is no longer permissible to regard global issues from individualistic frameworks. The limited perspectives of social isolationists, whether in business, politics, or religion, are manifestations of cultural introversion. The scientific humanist is a student of semantics, concerned with communication across the world whole. And again, linguistics is really central here. It's important to look at the computational linguists and people like Noam Chomsky, because they're very central to the AI and the computing. He is trying to discover how much each man may speak to all men in friendliness. We now realize that our misunderstandings frequently have a linguistic basis, which semantic analysis may clear up. It is one aim of scientific humanism to formulate a common semantic platform for human understanding and cooperation. Scientific method is simply democracy in thinking and in action. Therefore, scientific humanism frankly accepts the social responsibility of scientific research and social communication of knowledge. And like, I'm thinking like they were imagining it would be Esperanto or something, but now it's just like automated language processing. Scientific control of nature has reached a stage where our society could, if it were properly organized, produce enough food, shelter, clothing, and medicine for all mankind. Economic security is not a vain dream if we organize for an economy of plenty. Cynicism, defeatism, and escapism result from an inadequate grasp of the vast potentialities of social reform when guided by social intelligence. And so I think, again, the social reform, we have to think back to Bentham, right? So let me just revisit Bentham here. Wait a minute, one sec. Yeah, down here. So we've got the panopticon workhouses. We've got Jeremy Bentham. He worked with Edwin Chadwick on the Poor Laws, and they worked on, I forgot. Move it over. Sorry. So we've got Bentham, Jeremy Bentham. We have Edwin Chadwick, and he was working on the Poor Laws and contracts, actually working on franchise bidding, contracts for public services, which is very much relevant to the public-private partnerships. Working on the Poor Law, where they were optimizing everything for the most happiness for the most people, but then they would have these panopticons where they would even involve children, and the play of the children would be harnessed into the machine. So they would like run up and down this thing called a sinking stage. And their play would be harnessed for the industrial power system. And so, when we're talking about the social reform measures, and we have to be really cautious, because in retrospect, things that they thought were reforming were really pretty terrible. And, again, engineering for plenty, I'm just going to say, it has a lot to do with the coordination mechanism. And so what the free market people would say is there's like a market failure, there's a communication and a coordination failure. And all we need to do is coordinate it better, and then that coordination shall be done through the cybernetic circuits, which is the distributed ledger. Okay, scientific control of nature has reached a stage where our society could, if it were properly, sorry, I've already done this. So economy of plenty. Okay. Yeah, and social intelligence. Oh, and this was the other thing that I wanted to include. So the coordination needs lots of data, right? And so within this transpartisan movement, two of the key figureheads, like representing alt-right and alt-left, were Cynthia McKinney, so she was representing the peace side, and Robert David Steele, who was representing the alt-right side. And I actually came across this kind of wild slide share. Oh, shoot. Here, I keep forgetting to go back. Okay, so here we go. So we have the transpartisan movement here. And then we've got Cynthia McKinney, and we have Robert David Steele, who did that Arise tour. And he was a major advocate of open source intelligence. Now, it's quite interesting, because I found essentially it was a slide share. It was old. It was from 2007. And like nobody else could open it, so I saved a bunch of the slides off of it. It was about 55 slides. I saved about half. But because actually reading between the lines, it was really helpful to sort of understand his position on open source. And I'm sure many people already know, but he was he called himself a recovering CIA spy. And not only just any spy, but he was working on advanced IT and AI for the CIA, and he created the U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence Command. So, I don't know how all this fits into this imagined, resistance program, or, who would get on a bus tour with someone who has sort of this background. And he was very close. He wanted to run everything through Amazon. So he wanted to set up a global intelligence network, an open source agency, to have citizen-centered governance on cell phones. Now, remember, this is 2007. He wanted to have reforms where open source intelligence was 80 to 90% of the answer. And he wanted to create a smart nation. But it's not going to be of, by, and for the people. It will be of, by, and for the machine of AI. And so, I think it's really important to imagine that in this world of decentralized bottom-up organizing, they need tons of data. It needs to be free-flowing. It can't be siloed. And so in this way, like the surveillance privacy narratives, ironically, are driving us into the interoperability that will interface with the open source. I think, like, I don't really believe that so much of our data is going to be protected. They want it to be interoperable, and then they want to be able to query on it. And this is another one of the images that he uses, like talking about everything, open everything, have all the images, digital language translation, digital documents, graphics, everything available for the sentiment analysis, for the visual analysis, for the pattern recognition. That is what was coming of everything being open. And they would call for everything to be open because we need it to be coordinated. If we were only coordinated, we would have enough for everyone, right? Because of it's a market failure scenario. And so, like, I agree that things are totally out of whack and need, like a significant tending to, right? Like, things need to be, in, my opinion, like, people's needs do need to be met. I don't think it should be a UBI scenario. And I don't think it should be by feeding all of our open source analytics to AI. But I think that this idea of understanding, if we were simply in better control of our society, we could do all the things. That hasn't addressed the power dynamic. That hasn't addressed that at all. So, okay. All right. Human nature is characterized by wide flexibility, and this provides a plastic basis for social progress. Again, think bottom up. Since scientific laws are tentative statements, useful only so long as they enable us to describe and predict within an existing framework of human experience, we should not be bound too rigidly by established notions of what is considered possible or impossible. Man is a real agent, again, that word agent, in determining the course of events. The future of our Earth will be decided in part by the role in which humanity is to play in the remaining acts of this as yet incomplete drama. Present difficulties are surmountable, but the broad background of social causation is worldwide in scope, and no simple remedy will cure all of our ills. If and when science accepts a greater measure of responsibility for controlling the social impact of new technologies and inventions, then by the humanized application of scientific methods and results, it will be possible to guarantee peace and security to everyone. And again, that's we, right? That is the novel We, the read aloud that I did the last time, Zamyatin, right? That they a guaranteed peace, a guaranteed security. But is it like, beware of what you ask for? But to accomplish this requires fundamental changes in our political and economic systems, which is exactly what I've been talking about. This means within a more limited area that the problems of labor and capital, mass unemployment, and the like must be solved in terms of human welfare rather than by reference to the profit motive. And again, so that's where we're coming back to impact finance, right? And the circular economy and donut economics. Is this exact narrative is being rolled out now, right? And again, I'm not saying that the conditions are inaccurate. That's an inaccurate assessment, but they've already got all of the tools in place, and these are the tools that were put in place by the hedge fund investors. And then ultimately, it's not going to be about money. It's going to be about steering data and doing the digital analytics towards emergence, because the people who are the multi-billionaires already, like, having a few more billion isn't going to do that much more for them. What they're after is whatever this imagined global computer computational thing is going to get them, like to be gods or creators, like using our psychic and our emotional capabilities. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. So, okay. And on a broader scale, this calls for new ideas about money. Okay. New ideas about money, guys. International trade, debts, and the rest. Indeed, global thinking applied to the construction of a new international economic political structure is most essential. Okay. An international economic political structure. And again, remember, this is right at the time that the UN was coming online. 7. In the coming planetary civilization, those religions that obstruct social advance must be subordinated. All right, so the religions must be subordinated. In the culture of planetary democracy, the various authoritarian religions will be obsolete. But, quote, religious spirit through a renaissance of awe and reverence will constitute a wholesome ingredient of the universal synthesis. So that's the ecstasis. That is this idea of the ecstatic that is disconnected from any institution. Like, and actually, this is something that I was just listening to. You know what? I'm gonna pull this one up too. Give me a second. Sorry, I didn't. Okay, I want to pull this one up. I just posted this today. So this is, I keep mentioning stealing fire. I added a clip from Jamie Wheel.
Manson family or...
Okay. And so, Danny Katz had mentioned to me this book, and I'm really grateful. And she's like, he promotes ethical cults. Okay. So these are the people who are behind this idea of pushing the flow state, ego death, entering into altered states of consciousness for collective good benefit. And, he's framing this as an ethical cult. Like, I would say, the other aspect of this integral wisdom and this person, Gaffney, was there were lots of allegations about sexual impropriety with youth, underage people, among others. And so it's generally understood that, like, a lot of these, like, intentional communities get really messed up, right? And so if you imagine a future where, they're saying, look, the building is the computer. The building is the computer. Well, think about what that means for WeWork, right? A co-living, co-working, co-learning space, right? You create a building that's a computer, and then you put people in it with cameras, and then you create an engineered social condition with, printable psychedelic drugs and some expectation of neurofeedback, and put certain people in charge. Like, when you're asking for ethical cults, I think it's very, very, very unlikely that that's what you're actually going to get. So I'm going to just play this clip now. This one is not too long. It's 3 minutes.
Manson family or the Jim Jones drink the Kool-Aid side, but from religious studies or anthropology, a cult is literally just a community of practice bonded together around some shared epiphanic or revelatory experience. Basically, it's any religious group that is not yet state sanctioned is a cult. So the question is we know there are dysfunctional ones. We know there are lots and lots of unethical cults, particularly where leaders hijack money, power, sexuality, and control. And you mean pick any two and you're done, So the question is rather than steering away from that and saying that won't happen or it shouldn't happen or that's not what we're doing, steer into it and say, okay, if we're going to build vibrant communities of practice, how do we build ethical cults? And what I would imagine, and that's clearly a conversation for us all to figure out, but what I would imagine is that, we've seen this movie before. We know how this goes badly wrong, and we've had about a half century of, Eastern hierarchical lineage traditions getting buggered up and bastardized and imported into the West, and varying kind of gurus with feet of clay stepping up to lead children's crusades, that all just go off the cliff. And so the question would be, if we're trying to build ethical cults, are they experimental and experiential so that there is no dogma or doctrine to buy into? Are they decentralized so that people maintain their own common sense, their own judgment, and their own agency? And are they pointed towards, I would hope, some sort of social good or action? And can you, and all of the known issues of dysfunctional cults, can we just say, hey, let's just forever be vigilant about shared in-groups, about specific vernacular, about an inside-outside group mentality, about mediated access to ecstasy, right? And that's another kicker, because almost in every single one of those situations where it does go wrong, that group does something together that creates a state experience that they come to believe is exceptional, special, and quite often is doled out or tightly controlled by the person in charge. And so if we create distributed access to techniques of ecstasy, so everybody is on their own recognizance, and responsible for having access to these things, integrating them and growing them, there are no fish stories to swallow. So it's open source meaning making, and there's no sage on the stage. There's nobody up front that has lopsided truth or authority claims, that maybe we have the chance. And then also, a great one from a lot of religious traditions that seems to get skipped these days is an ethic of service. Are we doing something with this? Or are we just kind of crawling up our asses and engaging in endless self-development?
All right. So I want to point out here that like this idea of the decentralized access to ecstasis, right? And so they're going to remove the institutions of faith, and that because clearly their idea is that they need a global culture, like that everything has to be part of a global culture. And then so then of course you have to get rid of the world religions, but you need something that will keep people from falling apart, right? And they need to have a meaning, like something to add meaning to their life. So you'll have this ecstasis opportunity, but it will be on your own reconnaissance, right? It will be decentralized and distributed. So if you imagine that they want to use life as some sort of computational interface that is available like on demand, right? That you can, that's like you can assemble and disassemble it, right? You don't actually want people to have a lot of like connections to each other. You just want everyone as an individual unit, like everyone as an individual agent. And so I think that this is really,
so that would be my hope, is that ethical cult building is the...
Sorry, I was trying to finish that up. So anyway, what I was saying is this idea of the distributed ecstasis is very similar. It evokes to me that the authoritarian religions will be obsolete, but the religious spirit, through a renaissance of awe and reverence, will have a wholesome ingredient, right? That they'll still give you something, but they'll take away the other stuff. Fragmented society must give way to integration. Again, we're integral. In the past, morality has frequently been a matter of latitude, longitude, and even altitude. In the future, we must build an international morality. So an international morality, because they're after the psychic part, right? This places a heavy responsibility on philosophy, which should serve as the cultural universalizer for the planetary pattern of life. And again, patterns. Patterning is what the AI is looking for, is pattern. The scientific humanist finds his courage and his feeling of responsibility arising from the fact that man's scientific progress is commensurate with his means and media of locomotion. He sees in retrospect that in successive order man has conquered solids, liquids, and gases from the land, sea, and air. He moves on to more subtle media, and he triumphs over space and time. Again, time. He is uniting the planet in a technological unity, which cries out for a parallel political intellectual unity. The radio, airplane, and television are conferring a mastery over distance and time, again with the time, and further conquests of our air-age global technology should be used by free people everywhere to build their own planetary civilization. And I would say this idea of the radio, airplane, and television, like today would be, the blockchain, the bioreactor, and the 3D printer. Like that's how it's gonna, that would be today's equivalency to like build your own Holon with your own bioreactor, 3D printer, and distributed ledger technology. Planetary humanism is welded to the view that men become most human when they go all out for total living. Yeah, and that's this ecstasis stuff again, thus fostering the federation of friendly peoples. Accordingly, the coming humanism first and last aims at global orientations, global symbolisms, and global techniques for doing things. He likes that. The scientific humanists bend their efforts to the end that the era of the air age intercommunication shall break over the barriers of national boundaries, racial demarcations, exclusive religious frameworks, and political economic walls, into a topology of human relationships that shall overshadow the old principle of exploitation and transcend the relative values of wealth, caste, race, and nation. And I would say, that's one of these issues, is that like people, like they're idealistic, right? Like that's what's happening right now in the distributed ledger technology space. You've got a lot of like mostly young or young-ish, very ideal, like they're naive and they don't understand. We haven't addressed the power dynamic of this society. yet. And so if we advance with these technologies where we haven't actually addressed the power imbalances, it's not going to turn out well. But like, no one wants to believe that they're a part of something that's going to be problematic. So I would say that there is a level of idealism, but we should, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I think it's not going to turn out well. Just that let's just move forward thinking that everything is going to be okay. Okay, just one second. Sorry, I just lost my track. Okay. Yeah, so number 10, the next medium of man's self-evolution beyond the solid, liquid, and gas states of matter, which humanity has already mastered, lies in the domain of field physics, which shall provide the framework for the development of higher psychic faculties. In the topological sociology of scientific humanism, we study the manner in which the life space of each individual person is transcended in the emergent dimensionality of the higher energy continuum. And this is where I will say the cosmic humanism, it's all about physics and, theoretical physics, and I have a really hard time with it. This is a much easier read than that book. But maybe someday I'll understand it. This is not poetry. We are talking literally of a time in which our planetary integrations occur. Our whirling planet is portrayed as a rotating armature generating lines of force which are weaving the fabric of a higher consciousness and unifying peoples into the texture of a world mind made incarnate through the world sensorium, with all the human race functioning as the all-enveloping planetary cortex. For us today, the most immediate object of aspiration and reverence must remain this upward striving movement of humanity as it curves over the broad horizons of our whirling globe to unify the purposes of the actions of the Earth's 2 billion inhabitants. And I would say that visual there, the upward striving movement as it curves around the whirling globe, is very much like spiraling, right? The spiral, and that's part of the spiral dynamic and the spintronics. As we listen to the sweet, sad music of humanity, let us catch more of the overtones of human aspiration the world round. Let us contribute to this emerging melody of mankind. Let us build that temple of humanity in which the minor chords of dissonance serve to enrich the spherical harmonics of the higher consciousness of the human race. That was a long one. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 2. The next one, chapter 3, will be Morphogenetic Fields of Force. So that was the mental fetus. We're done with that. So I guess I will call it a night. Thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. And with all of my technical difficulties, I'm still not great with the 2-computer thing. But anyway, thanks for your patience. Till the next time.